Now, 7 p.m., and I'm reconvening to open session and calling to order the regular Board of Education meeting. Oops, you're okay? Yeah, okay, for Indian Prairie School District 204 on Monday, April 4th, 2022. Jeannie, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Jane.
Here.
Ms. Fosdick. Mr. Karubis.
Here.
Mr. Rising.
Here.
Ms. Deming. Ms. Grover. Ms. Donahue.
Here. We have a quorum. Mr. Karubis, will you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next regular board meeting will be held on Monday, April 18th. And we have a couple of board salutes. Ms. Jane.
Congratulations to Wabansie Valley senior Jasona Rajesh, who was awarded a prestigious National Coca-Cola Scholarship. Coca-Cola scholars are well-rounded, bright students who not only excel academically, but are also actively involved in their schools. These leaders are passionate, service-oriented, and demonstrate a sustained commitment to bettering their community. Jasona was one out of total of 150 students in the nation selected, and 1 out of 10 in Illinois. The original applicant pool was over 68,000. Congratulations to Jasona on this stellar achievement.
Mr. Rising.
The board salutes Wabansie Valley science teacher Carl Armstrong for publishing a novel, They Left One Tree. The story takes place 500 years from now and describes what the future will look like after the effects of climate change. Carl Armstrong was a semifinalist for the 2021 Illinois Manuscript Contest and was awarded the 2022 Prism Prize for Climate Literature Honorable Mention. In addition, the cover of the book was designed by art teacher Molly Bozarth. Congratulations, Carl.
Okay, next up is our student representative report by Saad Qureshi from Mattia Valley High School. Welcome.
Hey, Mr. Rising.
Hey,
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. My name is Saad Qureshi, and I'm the class of 2023 Executive Board Representative from Mattia Valley, and I'm ecstatic, absolutely ecstatic to be here with you all tonight. First off, Mattia Valley had the opportunity to bring back some of the traditions of having a spring Pep Assembly. The assembly contained a cappella singing by our a cappella groups, Apollo and Muses, a humorous duet acting from Mattia Valley speech team members Lauren Vertine and Saish Puthina, and the orchestra's partner dance that everyone seemed to enjoy. The assembly also contained games hosted by the MCs such as blindfolded musical chairs, a balloon relay race, and a bachelorette game. Mattia Valley plans on starting a new tradition by having a farewell Pep Assembly for our seniors. Mattia Valley started a new tradition by hosting the first annual Multicultural Night. The evening consisted of different religious groups and ethnic groups that came together and shared a little bit about their culture with others. It truly was a great event that is bound to make a return next year. Mattia hosted the annual variety show. The variety show is where students and staff members auditioned with various acts from performing mathematical magic to singing and dancing. The staff and students performed later in the week after school for everyone to enjoy and watch. Now for the athletic update. Boys volleyball is off to a great 6-1 start of a season. Can't wait to see the rest of the season. Both girls and boys track team have been placing very highly in every indoor meet they've attended. Girls badminton and boys tennis have been winning at all levels from singles to doubles. Both combined girls and boys lacrosse teams have been performing phenomenally so far within the season. Keep up the great work. Lastly, our combined Warriors hockey team won the state championship for combined high school hockey. Congratulations once again to our Mattia and Wabansie athletes on another state championship. That's all I have for the April board report. Thanks, everyone. And as always, go Mustangs.
Thank you. Okay, it is now time for public comment. 60 minutes is allowed for public comment, and each person is limited to 3 minutes. When addressing the board, we ask that you respect the confidentiality and safety of our students and school district personnel. We also ask that those addressing the board be cognizant that this is an open meeting and is available to all age groups, and as such, ask that you consider who the audience members are this evening and keep comments age appropriate. Public comment represents the voice and opinion of the speaker. There will be no feedback from the board members during the meeting, but follow-up may be provided by an administrator as appropriate. We only have one speaker tonight, and it is Jeff Wynn. Welcome.
Thank you, Board. Thanks for all you guys do. I know you don't get paid for this, so I appreciate what you do. My name is Jeff Wynn. I'm here to speak out against the National Sex Education Standards. These standards were written by a nonprofit advocacy group known as Future of Sex Education Initiative in partnership with Advocates for Youth, Answer, SECUS, and with contributions from Gender Spectrum, Human Rights Campaign, Planned Parenthood, and others. These are not educational standards written by educators, but rather ideologies advocated by these extreme groups to push an agenda. These groups advocate for the gender of your choice, LGBTQ, and abortion on demand. They advocate for allowing young children to receive abortions, gender-affirming therapies, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones without their parents' knowledge. It's not for me to judge adults who want to live these lifestyles. They have the free will to make their own choices in life. But I take exception when they think it's okay to push these agendas on our young children. They have no place in our public schools. They can do very serious psychological damage to our children, and physical damage can be irreversible. Transgender ideology in schools is psychological abuse that often leads to chemical castration, sterilization, and surgical mutilation. We're seeing a substantial number of teens who are coming out as the opposite sex. It's easy to understand why this happens. They're looking for attention for one thing, and for another, they're in an environment where coming out as a trans can all of a sudden give them popularity. The goal of the National Sex Education Standards is to sexualize our children. Beginning in kindergarten through 12th grade, they emphasize gender identity and sexual orientation. Their instruction materials I've seen from other states who adopted these standards are pornographic and not at all age appropriate. The terms that are in the standards are not age appropriate, and since we have one school student in here, I won't go into that. It's not medically accurate to teach children that there's many genders and that they can choose which one they want to be. It's not medically accurate either to teach them that aborting a baby is not taking a life. There's a heavy emphasis in high school on creating LGBTQ advocates out of our children. They also promote abortion as being equal to parenting and adoption. They want our teachers to circumvent the parents and provide addresses of groups that will provide puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and abortions. Keep in mind the learning standards that will be coming out later this year are a voluntary request that is not being forced on the district.
Ms. Donahue, speaker's time has ended.
Thank you very much, Mr.
I'll just
Wynn.
finish up here. In
No,
closing,
well-
I want you to keep in mind
Thank
where
you,
these standards
Mr.
came
Wynn.
from. They're designed to sexualize
sorry.
our children, corrupt the minds of our students,
Thank
corrupt the
you.
moral fabric of our community,
you very
and
much,
promote an
Mr. Wynn.
ideology that has no place in our culture.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn. Thank you. Okay, next we move to our consent agenda items and superintendent report. We will now start with the superintendent report. Mr. Akarius.
Thank you. Dr. Talley did prepare a report, which I will deliver this evening. Ms. Donahue, members of the board, and the Indian Prairie community, tonight, unfortunately, I must start off with sad news. Over spring break, one of our students at Gregory Middle School, Shishir Jaligama, passed away on March 29th after a long fight with cancer. We are saddened by the passing of Shishir and send our condolences to his family and want his family to know we are thinking of them in this most difficult time. I ask that we take a moment of silence right now to honor Shashir. Thank you. I also would like to provide you an update about a grant that was mentioned at the last Board of Education meeting. This is the Community Partnership Grant. We applied for and titled our grant the Parent Education and Community Engagement Peace of Mind grant that has a focus on mental health supports. At the last Board of Education meeting, Dr. Talley had indicated that we had received $500,000 for the next 2 years. Since that time, our award has actually grown to $635,000 over the next 2 years. We are pleased with the additional funds and will work with our community partners on how we will spend the funding. In future board meetings, we will inform the public about the following items. At the April 18th board meeting, we will give a STEM update. At the May 2nd board meeting, there will be a budget forecast as well as an IT update. And then on May 16th, we will talk about our summer learning programs as well as all the grants that we have received to fully update the board on those, as well as the community. And then finally, before we hear from Mr. Ron Johnson tonight about transportation, Dr. Talley would like to thank him and Miss Alicia Clayton, transportation coordinator, for their work they have done to address the transportation issue related to grandfathering. Mr. Johnson and Ms. Clayton are a team of two who work diligently with First Student to route all of our buses across the district. They have worked very hard, and he wants to thank them for their dedication and commitment to our goal of trying to provide transportation to all who requested it. I will now turn the meeting back to Ms. Donahue.
Thank you. Next, we move to our consent agenda items. I need a motion for approval of consent agenda items D through M.
I'll make a motion that the Board of Education approve consent agenda items D through M as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Jeannie, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rising.
Yes?
Mr. Karubis.
Yes.
Ms. Jane.
Yes.
Ms. Donahue.
Yes. The motion passes. Now we will have a presentation from Ron Johnson regarding transportation for grandfathering of boundary changes.
Good evening, members of the Board of Education. I am joining Ron tonight with our transportation update. And as Dr. Talley mentioned in his superintendent update, we are presenting to update you on the status of providing transportation for students who elected the grandfathering option related to the school district boundary changes that go into effect next year. Ron and I also wanted to take this time tonight to cover a few other topics related to transportation. Transportation has come up sort of several times over the last couple of years, whether it's been as part of our COVID mitigation strategies or as we look to reopen schools last year. It's been part of our budget presentation. I know it even got brought up a little bit at our special education update last month. So we thought this was a good opportunity to, in addition to covering the grandfathered student information, just provide a transportation overview and then an update on a few specific initiatives we're working on to both the board and the community. So with that, I'll start tonight just reminding the board and our community some of the fast facts associated with transportation. So we rely on an outsourced transportation model, relying on two main service providers to provide transportation for all students in the district. The two companies we use are First Student and Rich Lee. First Student is one of, if not the biggest provider nationwide, and Rich Lee is also a big provider in the student transportation industry. In total, between the two providers, we provide transportation to about approximately 1,700 students. Total miles traveled is about 3.6 million each year. We've done that while maintaining a 94% on time. 94% of on time has been our on time percentage this year. Our annual budget for transportation is about 22 million, and that's split between both local and state funding sources. On the consent agenda item just presented, we did approve our transportation for the 22-23 school year. We are happy to continue to partner with both of the First Student and Rich Lee, as they have been valuable service providers for the district for many years. The final piece I just want to mention that's not on the slide, but we rely on what's known as a 3-tiered system for providing transportation. So we're using the same drivers and buses for high school as well as middle and elementary routes. So those same buses are dropping off students at the high school, returning to pick up and do a middle school drop-off, and then do an elementary drop-off as well. And that's really been one of the limiting factors and challenges as we've explored other opportunities or ideas, both in the past and as it came to some of the reopening, as well as some of the grandfathering conversations we'll go in earlier. Using that 3-tiered system does save us about $10 million annually. But again, it does create challenges when we start talking about flexible start times at levels, providing transportation for extracurricular activities or field trips, or again, even meeting other one-off needs throughout the district. Just wanted to really quickly cover that as an Illinois school district, we have to follow the Illinois School Code related to transportation eligibility. That means that we provide transportation to all students who live greater than 1.5 miles away from their school of residence, or if they're less than 1.5 miles away, we evaluate if we provide transportation due to a serious hazard. And that would be things like crossing Route 59 or other busy roads, crossing railroad traffic, things like that. If we do not follow these policies or provide transportation to students who maybe don't qualify under those, that transportation is not eligible for that state reimbursement piece of the funding. And so that's why it's been important to the district to be able to maintain our transportation program, that we follow these guidelines. As we built our grandfathering program that we're presenting in a little more detail tonight, we did make sure we prepared it in a way that keeps that transportation eligible for the transportation funding reimbursement from the state. So finally, before I turn it over to Ron, we have covered several times, again, as part of our budget and otherwise, the current driver staffing situation. And there really was a driver shortage that existed pre-pandemic that the pandemic's only increased. So what we just wanted to show here is we've been able to operate this year with about 246 drivers. That's down 45 from where we were historically pre-pandemic when we were at 293. We really feel that 264 would be the ideal staffing level. So that's a reduction of 30 that we've achieved over the past several years as a result of more efficient routing, enhanced use of GPS technology to route our buses and to be able to make adjustments in real time. And then finally, it does reflect a slight decrease in student enrollment as well. So we've made some real good changes, and Ron and his team, I do want to commend them for identifying where we were able to reduce drivers, but we're still under the number that we need to optimally perform. And as a result, that's created an environment where almost on a daily basis, we're rerouting drivers. We're doing what we call sweeper routes, where drivers are picking up additional routes than their schedule. We're making last-second changes. I don't know if Ron or his team have slept past 5 a.m. any day this school year, because I think there's always a phone call or an email that they're dealing with along those lines. So this driver staffing challenge, it's been a challenge. It's been a real challenge. As the sort of last part of the slide shows, every time we add 1 or 2 drivers, it seems like we also lose 1 or 2. So even though we've added 72 drivers or received 72 applications this year, that's net only a 5 increase by the time you factor in resignations, natural turnover, the lag it takes for drivers to get certified and receive their CDL and their school driver's license permits and things like that. So this was the other limiting factor that we really had to work around as we evaluated our grandfathering options, and then also as we look going forward with other transportation initiatives or challenges that we're facing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron to specifically talk about our grandfathering plan for next year, as well as one other initiative, and then we'll talk at the end about some things we have hopefully on tap for next school year and beyond.
All right, thank you, Matt. Good evening, board members and Indian Prairie community. So before we were able to even look at the grandfathering transportation plan, we needed to look at the new boundaries as they were approved earlier this year. It's a complete redo of our routing scheme that has started over 20 years ago and just kept being manipulated and updated over time. Once we got the files, the shape files that had the new boundaries from RSP, we then have to look in and look at the walking boundaries, the hazard boundaries for each area, for each school. Obviously, that takes time. It's a manual process. That's where, in Mr. Ukaris's update, when he recognized Alicia, she spends a lot of time on that. The new boundaries created some new hazard areas that we need to review, where they may need to cross various roadways that current students in the current school year don't need to do. There's 4 middle schools that are affected, 9 elementary schools. We completed the 4 middle schools and submitted those evaluations to the Illinois Department of Transportation for their review and approval. We're starting to receive those back as approved, so that's a good thing, means I did my job the right way. And the 9 elementary schools, so we're about through 2. I'm on the 3rd one right now, submitted those 2 to IDOT and getting ready to submit the 3rd, and then we'll be completing the rest of them by the end of the school year. It is a lengthy process. It's a lot of data you got to gather for not only the traffic, but in-field measurements, in-field observations. You don't want to just look at Google Maps and say that's the environment that kids are going to be walking through at a specific time during the day. So you go and look. And then we're also looking at our current bus route paths, looking at the optimization. We're coming across various areas that we're stopping every other block, which not only makes motorists, traveling motorists anxious and maybe looking at that red flashing stop sign as an inconvenience, and maybe looking to remove a few stops off of our routes where instead of having 15 stops on a bus route, we'll only have 10. That may mean you may have to walk a few houses further than you're currently walking to get to a bus stop, but that's also allowing us the time to repair those routes to get them put together. And when we talk about grandfathering, what we're able to do for the students that have elected the grandfather. By doing that, we're also looking to keep the walk time to bus stops in that 10 to 15 minute range, no more than that. And that's pretty much where we're at right now. And then looking at the age group as well, elementary versus secondary. As we discussed multiple times what the grandfathering plan was and who's eligible to be grandfathered, rising 5th graders for elementary, rising 7th and 8th graders for middle school, and rising 10th, 11th, and 12th graders at the high school level. When we presented on February 8th, we talked about what we were believed to be able to do. There were some conversations at the end of that presentation. Some direction that as the elections came in, what we can look at and what we can evaluate within the areas that were grandfather eligible. Some of that led to discussions on if we can't do it for all, what are we able to do? Do we provide as much as we can? And a lot of that came down to, going back to the couple slides ago, is we needed to redo and restart what we are going to be routing next school year, and looking at the routing scheme and looking at the routing plan as those elections came in, which is time, right? We needed more time. We came up with a color coding to make it easy to understand. Green means go, yellow means hold on, we need to keep evaluating, but it's close. Orange meant it's going to be problematic. It's not a firm no yet. And red was there's absolutely no way we're able to do that. And there were a few areas at the February 8th presentation that met that red and orange criteria that we were concerned with prior to receiving the numbers on that Friday. So when we presented on the 8th, we had 224 students that we'd be looking to route, and these were the areas. As of the elections came in, there were only 48 students that elected the grandfather, and we can do all 48. So we'll be able to provide transportation for all 48 students that elected the grandfather at those schools. Middle school, we had a lot of red. Bigger areas to cover, looking at capacities on buses without redoing those boundaries and looking at the routes and assigning students, grade advancing our current student population into next year's boundaries, into next year's routings, what would that look like in the unknowns of how many we would have elected to grandfather, along with those vehicle capacities, there was a lot of red, right? So 797 students, with the majority of them not being guaranteed transportation. After the elections came in, there was 294, and we can do them all. So middle school and elementary, we're good. We'll be able to put them on existing capacities with the existing routings without adding any additional drivers or expense. High school, there's one area which is surrounding here, the Meadow Lakes area of where we're at right now. There were 239 students that met the criteria that would grandfather into Matia that we would not be able to provide transportation for on the February meeting that we discussed, and what that area was and what it looked like and the reasons being. It wasn't that we had a high number of senior students that were able to drive themselves or, you know, get a ride with another friend. It was split 80 pretty much. It was pretty even. So we couldn't even say, all right, all seniors drive yourselves, find a way, but we can do it to the rising sophomores and juniors. It wasn't there when we discussed this on the 8th of February. After the elections came in, dropped that number down to 176, which is a lot still. It still gave us a problem. It did take it away that we can continue to evaluate. It put it into the orange phase. It's not a definite no, but we really needed to continue to build out the routes, not only for Matia Valley, but for Nequa and Wabanzi, looking at what routes would become available, what drivers would be available, and where those capacities would lie. So what we did is we surveyed all 176 families and asked them to provide us, how are you going to get your child to school next school year? And the survey came in as they need transportation. So it didn't really help me with my evaluation. We did have about 50 parents not respond, so you have to assume that they need transportation, and really didn't want to tell us no because it's a yes, so we assumed that they were. And that led us to say, okay, let's move forward with the evaluation, build out not only Nequa and Wabanzi to see if we can meet the needs of Matia, but now we have to look at the middle schools to see if we can free up a driver there and create a 2-tier, which is a 3-tier type of job day. After we did that, which takes a couple weeks, still at the 176, but the good thing is it will now change to green. So for every student that elected to be grandfathered, we'll be able to provide all transportation for all the students that elected to grandfather. So that's a good thing, right? I mean, students that were unsure of how they were going to get to school will now have a way to get there through the grandfathering timeline, which is a 3-year phase out. Any questions at this point before we move on?
Mr. Rising, anything?
Just real quick, I know that transportation that we pay for primarily is done by route. That's how we pay for a student. Are we keeping the routes relatively the same? And the reason I ask that is, number one, for cost, but number two, I want to understand that with this grandfathering, is that still reimbursable by the state?
Yeah, so there's 2 questions. There's one was Mr. Karubas's feedback during the February presentation was, we want to know the costs of this. My goal is to not, even with any other initiative, is to not to increase costs to the district, which is why we needed the time to evaluate when the elections came in. This is not increasing. If we didn't do grandfathering, our costs would be the same. We're putting on existing routes that are creating the capacities based on more efficient routings. Instead of running a route that conflicts where you only can have a 2-tier, now you can have a 3-tier route, which creates additional capacity that you can sweep through these areas. So it's not that Meadow Lakes is gonna have 3 dedicated buses. There's probably gonna be 10 buses run through this area that have capacities on them. Another piece of that is at the beginning of startup every school year, we do head counts to make sure that the number of students that we assign are the numbers that are riding, and we make adjustments even after the fact. So if we have 60 students assigned to a bus route and every day there's only 30, we'll collapse that route and save that cost. So those are routing efficiencies that we do ongoing. Every week we look at those numbers and work with the high school administration team on those. So this is not adding anything more than what we would need if we weren't doing grandfathering transportation.
And then Matt, the other piece?
The second piece is,
Okay.
yes, it is transportation eligible. These are routes that meet the 1.5 mile criteria, they'd be transportation eligible if they were assigned to those attendance centers regardless. So,
And I just add, I mean, that was sort of the parameters we started with, both from a cost standpoint, but also practically speaking from a driver availability standpoint. We were not going to be in a position to add drivers or add additional costs to provide this. So.
yeah, if you recall the slide that said we had 72 applications come in this year and we net 5 drivers, we're getting the applications, but there's fallout also with that. So you're not getting 72 behind the wheel. Unfortunately, I wish we would, but we're not seeing that turn-in rate.
Ms. Jane?
Thank you for all your work. It's incredible what you guys have done in such a short amount of time. Once the routes are set, is there any scenario where a route would be pulled? Meaning, like, let's say students aren't using that route. Do you reevaluate that again?
Yeah, there's constant ongoing evaluation, which comes to the head count. So we assign a route so that the bus route is full, not at the stated manufacturer's capacity. So we're not going to have 72 kids riding a route. They just wouldn't fit, right? It'd be overcrowded. So we try to set capacities between 50 and 60 for the elementary and between 40 and 50 for the middle and high school, just due to the size of students. They're bigger at that level. Sometimes we'll try to squeeze a little bit more on there, take the head counts and adjust. But like I was saying earlier, we will look at and work with the building administrative team and the driver. If they give us that feedback, hey, there's only 20 students riding, and if we see another 3 routes that have a capacity of 10 on them, we'll collapse that route. So it's not removing the service, but the driver may look different as we make that adjustment.
And given what you've said about the driver shortage, do you see anything changing, like any movement nationwide or at the state level or at the local level that might?
So both at the federal and state level, they've lessened some of the requirements to get a CDL. So that's the biggest hurdle for our school bus drivers. They have to get a full-blown CDL. Then they have to get the passenger endorsement. Then they also have to get the school bus endorsement. So it's a lot of studying and testing. So there's fallout with that. They get into it and say, this is not for me. There's also a CDL industry that is struggling. You got the Amazons, the FedExes, the UPSs that you're also competing with that same CDL requirement. So some of them see that there's just more upside, more long-term career benefit there. Sometimes they use the school bus industry as a stepping stone or a stopgap before those openings open up. So I don't see it getting any better within the next 3 to 5 years. Honestly, I believe where we're at today is probably the same conversations we're going to have in the next 5 years. That's my opinion based on what I see across the country and locally. I mean, we've benefited with the technology that we've put on the school buses with Tyler Drive, that we can ask another driver to pick up a few stops with minimal impact, right? So we have it where other school districts are saying we can't cover your route. So that by us moving away from the Stone Age horse and buggy and getting into the 21st century with technology on buses, it's carried us through reopening our buildings last year, covering the 30, 40 driver shortage that we've seen at the beginning of this school year, where some of the surrounding districts, some of the other districts in the state and in the nation don't have that technology and they're struggling a little bit. So it's definitely a recruitment tool. Look what we have, they don't have it. We definitely use it in some of the job fairs that we attend, and I attend them with First Student. We host them ourselves. There's one on Good Friday at Waubonsee High School where they're doing a kind of like an Easter egg extravaganza. They're gonna do an Easter egg hunt, do raffles, and you can test drive a bus if you want to go out there. I know you're substitute teaching, but if you want to try, maybe Todd DePaul can put some bumpers on the light poles or something.
And we've also increased wages?
We have. So there's a district that just passed a contract that raised their wage rate, so now we're in discussion to make sure that we stay above that so that they're not taking some of our driver pool, because it's not that there's like an academy of school bus drivers that is turning out drivers, right? It's we're all looking at the same pond and fishing at the same pond, hoping to get more fish, and it's just not there. So we gotta stay competitive with what's going on around us, as well as some of these other benefits like the technology on buses that help drivers and help the school districts and help parents, which we're going to go through in a little bit.
Thanks.
Mr. Karubas. Okay. So, thank you for everything. I know that 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever every day, just sounds crazy to me. And I thank you every day for doing that. And I hope all the parents in our district also do the same. For the proposed new bus routes, I'm assuming some parents might see longer routes for their children than they currently experience. Or?
No, we try to keep, so the 1.5 mile is about between walking to the bus stop and the bus ride is about a half hour, right? So we try to stay within those guidelines. Going past a 20 to 25 minute bus ride really breaks the pairing up. It creates an additional driver need, so we have to create our routes to be within 15 to 20, 22 minutes, which 98% of them are. Once you get into the special education realm where you're routing those, we have students going from north boundary to south boundary, so a little bit different. Nothing should look different except for you may have to walk a couple extra steps to get to a bus stop. It's really not changing that much.
Yeah, and I'll just add, one of the benefits of the boundary adjustments we did is that for those regular education routes, we got, through the change in the boundaries, we got rid of some of those longer routes that would be the challenges for us. So, so some of so we should see an overall improvement in the system as part of that boundary change, and that does, to Ron's point, allow us to more efficiently route the buses and again, hopefully provide the same level of service with the same or less drivers.
Yeah, and even the grandfathered students shouldn't see a big increase from what they're currently seeing. It should be very similar.
So are the grandfathered students on a separate bus from
No, they're gonna be intermingled, so they may be picked up, depending on if it's a high school student, they could be picked up first, sweep through the regular route within the attendance boundary that's assigned, and then go, so that can be a little bit longer. Once you get into how you pair your routes, so if we have a student that lives down by Station Boulevard that goes to Kendall and their grandfather into Kendall, we'll try to do a Matia route that sweeps up through Route 59, pick up that kid, and then go to the rest of the Kendall boundary, so they won't see anything increase from what they see now. So I wish it was, we can just flip a light switch. It's really address by address, student by student, roadway by roadway. It's really building it out that way. You know, the 1,270, 1,280 routes. It's not just, the software doesn't do it for you, definitely. I wish, but no.
Yeah, it looks incredibly complicated
Yeah,
just thinking about it. So thank you for all of this work.
Yeah.
So, all right, so you have another topic to talk about?
Yes. So, feels like ages ago, 3 years ago, we presented My Stop, and what My Stop is, it's a parent app where they can log into a website or download an app on their smartphone and see an ETA when the bus is going to get to the bus stop. Okay, so this is a lot of technology behind the scenes within our tech department. They've really supported our servers and updating our servers. I mean, it was Stan Gorbakian, and it was Adam Schmeets, and then now it's Rodney Mack. So there's been a lot of changes, but the initiative and the path has kind of stayed the same. Mentality has stayed the same. There's been a few other initiatives like Synergy and the student information system that we've tried to build some of the logins into. And then there was this, pandemic that hit where we weren't running school buses, so the thing was useless. But we've also, if you remember 3 years ago, we put Tyler Drive on all the buses, which saved us through the pandemic. But it was all geared to be able to do this and provide a tool for the driver, make the routes a little bit safer, and give the district data. When you talk about routing efficiencies, we can look at GPS routes and see how we're pairing and seeing does our planned time match the actual time? Are they running into a delay on the Ogden Frontenac Bridge, which that pairing just doesn't work. They're never going to make it because that thing backs up into Oswego every morning at 7 o'clock, right? So all this allows for us to get to this point. We kind of stepped into it, letting the drivers use it, getting on all the vehicles, giving our schools access to a system called Arrival Board, which we'll talk about here in a second, and then eventually starting a parent group, a pilot group, which allowed parents to use this software, give us the feedback, tell us what works, tell us what doesn't work so that we can go and troubleshoot, which then we go sometimes back to our tech services team and say, hey, are our servers okay? Or is the API between us and Tyler Technologies working? So we have, Michael Barth and Rodney and Alfonso and Robert Iwataki. I mean, there's like, the list goes on of people that behind the scenes are supporting this. We tried to align everything with this project, if you recall, and the bottom key is no cost to parents. It's all built into the suite of routing software, which we use Versatrans, which is a Tyler Tech product and their flagship for routing. It's built into the suite that we already had. So this is just turning it on and then making sure that the data that was coming through is reliable, that families weren't just going to see nothing and then all of a sudden we have to set up a call center to answer where's the bus, right? Wouldn't have worked. That's what a Tyler Drive looks like on a bus, and that's what the parent would see. There's a system called Arrival Board. So even if a parent says, hey, or a school says, hey, Ron, bus hasn't arrived yet, they can log into this and see this. This has helped tremendously. We gave access to this during this year's startup, and schools didn't have to call our transportation support center to see where the bus is. They were able to log in and see exactly, oh, it's right around the corner. I don't need to call Alicia, Ron. Doug's in there with dry erase boards. Matt's in there. I mean, not too many people are not in that room at startup. But it has gotten a lot easier and a lot better over the past few years. There's not too many people in there. That's a good thing. These are some of the screenshots. So on the left side, it's the app. And on the right side is if you used a web browser, if you had a computer or, went through the web browser on your phone instead of the app. But it's pretty reliable. I mean, it's within a minute from what we're seeing. Obviously, it's technology, and 3 years ago, that's exactly what Mr. Karubis mentioned. Is the one certainty about technology is it can fail, and yes, we can lose a cell signal, and the parent may not be able to see that. You'll see in a slide, we're not going to provide live support. This is a resource that you can use if it works and it's working. It is good, but yeah, if a GPS signal is lost, you'll lose it. So we're not going to, we're not going to answer that in the moment. This will not replace our existing procedures. You still should be at the bus stop a minimum of 5 minutes prior to your arrival time. Like if I was in high school and if I was on a bus, I can guarantee you I'd be watching this very closely, and we're not going to, my luck, I'd be chasing the bus because of the minute delay, but we don't want to create unsafe situations where you're chasing a bus, missing a bus, asking for a bus to come back, which is creating other obstacles, other issues because of an app and a piece of technology that can be used as a resource. I don't see this being used every day, all day, every morning. I see it being used when there's a snowstorm, it's raining outside. Do I have time? I'm standing at the bus stop, it's running late. I can look up to see where it's at. Is it going to be here in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and make decisions. As I was stating, we're not going to provide any live feedback. First student's not going to provide any live feedback or support. So if it's not working, we have a form that we've created that we use for the pilot group that we are going to use for our community and put that on our website that they can provide the feedback. Again, a bus will come regardless if the app is working. But we do want to see if there's something that we can troubleshoot. So community members can just submit the feedback on the form. We'll look at it, and if there's something to fix, we will. If there's something that we need to replace, we will. If there's a training component with a driver not logging in correctly, we can then just troubleshoot, right? So we're at the point where we can do a soft launch. We've worked with our tech services team on how we can set up user access and combine families. If you have a student at the middle school, at the high school, instead of having two separate logins, you can log into one account. There's going to be a method for that with looking at the security precautions that we were concerned about 3 years ago. Is if there's a no contact order, a parent won't have access to both students in that situation. In that situation, you would have separate logins. But there's going to be a way to request that online so that we can evaluate to make sure that those precautions are taken into place. It's unfortunately, the two softwares with single sign-on just won't interact the way we thought and would like them to, so it's not going to be done through single sign-on at this point. Rodney and his team are continuously looking at that and trying to build that in, but that was some of the reluctancy to go out, is to not create an additional login, but we feel that the tool is valuable, and we should get it out there and collect feedback. This Wednesday, Ms. Lisa Berry's going to put out a message to our community on how to access it, how to download it, how to use it. And then Monday, April 11th, our families that are receiving transportation service will be able to log in and see it. And then if they do want to combine the accounts, they can request that online, and it usually takes a few days to get that in place. Some of them we've already worked on knowing, based on through the pilot group, so it's a pretty quick turnaround on it. Mr. Shipley?
Yeah, so with that, we just also wanted to update a few other initiatives and projects that we're working on. Some of these have come to the board already for approval. Some of these you may be seeing coming in the future. So first, just wanted to talk quickly about what we are trying to do to work to adopt electric buses, or at least start piloting some electric buses as we prepare for what future transportation could look like, both for school districts and in general. So we've been working with First Student to apply through the EPA for the Clean School Bus Program. That's a very lengthy process that's only been more challenging as a result of the same sort of supply chain challenges that we're seeing throughout the economy right now. But we are hoping that within the next couple of years, we will receive 5 electric school buses to pilot. Again, that would represent a very small portion of our overall fleet, and this would be a pilot just to see how that works, and if that'll be something that we can gradually adopt and become a larger part of our school bus fleet. I will say the process to go through the EPA is not necessarily 100% required, but that's what allows this to be a cost-effective, or at least a cost-neutral solution for us. If we don't go through the EPA grant program, the cost of the electric buses is anywhere from 3 to 5 times the cost of a regular diesel fuel bus. And next, just wanted to highlight some of the additional equipment that we've purchased. We've increased the amount of activity buses throughout the district so that all middle schools now have access to an activity bus. This has really been in response to the driver shortage and other challenges in transportation. This gives us another tool to provide transportation for different athletic teams and activity clubs. In addition to that, we're starting to work next year. We're going to work with our coaches who may be interested in becoming school bus drivers so that they can drive their teams directly to their club or competition or game. We're not sure what the adoption will that be yet, but that's at least something we're working to as well to try and reduce our reliance on both First Student and Richley providing drivers for those after-school activities.
And let me just touch on that a little bit. A lot of our high schools want to leave at 3 o'clock. Well, that's when our drivers are still running routes, where if we were fully staffed, we would have a group of drivers that would be able to be allocated to just do that. Unfortunately, every driver we have available is running a route. So it's where does the sacrifice come from? So we're trying to provide middle schools, the basketball teams, the track teams, a way to get there earlier instead of waiting until 4:30 for a First Student bus. Same thing at the high school level. So that's kind of why that was needed.
Yeah, sorry. It does go back to that 3-tiered concept of needing the same drivers to run not only those elementary, middle, and high school routes each day, but then also to turn around and run the extracurriculars. It's a similar initiative for our STEPS program. We were able to purchase 2 wheelchair accessible minivans, which has allowed them to get to their community outings, community events, and do that in a way that does not put stress on our First Student team. And then finally, I'll just point out some of the, we're at a point where we are looking to refresh some of the GPS equipment and other equipment that we're using as part of our routing software, as part of this MyStop app. And so we'll be bringing something to the board this summer to start that refresh cycle. I think you would know how long the MyStop has been in process by looking at some of those screenshots where Apple phones that I think are well off the market now. So that's how long we've been working on this. And again, some of the equipment we're using in the buses go back to that time already. So I think with that, both Ron and I are available for questions on the MyStop app or any of these other initiatives, or if we do want to go back and talk about grandfathering or the other information.
Mr. Karubis.
If Mr. Rising wants to drive the middle school activity bus, does he need a CDL?
So if he's using it for extracurriculars, which is a non-curriculum trip, then no. But the district does have a driver approval process that they must go through. We do check the motor vehicle record. He does have to do a training, which is an online and a behind-the-wheel training with a first student safety trainer. So there's processes to protect to make sure we're putting a safe driver behind the wheel and they know how to operate that vehicle. If he wants to drive for curriculum, STEPS program, yes, you do need a non-CDL school bus permit because they're not driving the what's a 15 or 16 passenger or more vehicle, so it's a non-CDL school bus permit. But so they don't have to get the CDL, but they got to get the passenger and school bus endorsements. Yep.
And you talked about the electronic buses, I guess is how they're wording it, but the vast majority of our school buses, we don't own, right? We outsource them. They're owned by first students. So one of our cost-saving efficiencies is we don't invest our capital into actually purchasing the vast majority of our buses. Now, we do own some of those, and those are some that we see parked at the buildings. So there's third party, there's contracting, but we still talk about these things, even though there's legal niceties. We talk about them as our buses, as our drivers, as so tell me where the electronic buses falls into play with that. We're not getting the electronic buses, right?
No. So first student is going to own the fleet, right? It's their fleet. They have a capital purchase annual capital purchase where they're replacing buses, and just the direction of at both the federal level and the state level is, electric school buses, and they're pioneers as well. They want to be into it as well. There's other transportation companies that are doing it already. I mean, there's a couple of transportation providers on the West Coast that are already moving to a full EV or an electronic vehicle fleet. So in our area, the Midwest area, you can have all 4 seasons in the AM before noon. We want to make sure that the reliability is there, and you can still have the reliability of service. There's a mechanic training component. There's a power component. There's a lot of other things that data is still being gathered for our area, which is why you don't just go out and buy one, right? You want to make sure that if you need 3 hours of a charge, you can get through the route. And then what's the refresh rate? So a lot of that is why we're only going to pilot 5. So we don't own the fleet. It is still theirs, but it's part of their purchase cycle, their capital purchase cycle, which is why instead of buying a $400,000 vehicle, they need to go through this grant program so that it's cost neutral to the $80,000 diesel vehicle.
I want to make sure that we can, the bus will start at -20.
Yep.
That's pretty much, if we
Yes.
can do that, then I think we've won.
Yeah.
I met with the shop manager this morning. It's his same concern.
So I'll just comment, statewide, there's a single-digit number of districts that have electric buses that they're using on a daily basis. I think the actual number of buses in circulation last I heard was 11 or 12 or some number like that. So we're just trying to stay on top of this, and to Ron's point, really our concern is really in testing it when we do receive them, it is reliability and making sure that again, I think there's a on paper, I think people see school buses and they see, okay, you take the kids to school and you drop them back off, and then you charge for 6 hours and you do it again. And I think when you actually talk about our operations and how dynamic it is, and you add in field trips and extracurriculars and things like that, we really want to make sure that this is something that would be viable for a larger portion of the fleet before we go down that road.
And our partnership with First Student is solid. So when I said, hey, where are we at with EV school buses? Can we make that an initiative? They said, yeah, we can get you. Well, how's 3 to 5 sound? We're still early in the process, but when they're ready, it's a conversation. They're already on the train tracks. We want to be with them on that train, and at least attempt, right? I mean, we want to be smart about it because there's still an operation you have to run, right?
Two other points. When we go live with the MyStop, I recommend that we lead and stop with the page 21 stuff. Go to slide 21. This doesn't replace our current system, and there's no live support. Just
Yep.
start and stop with that.
That's part of the message Miss Berry will be sending
Because
out.
the rest of the stuff is
Yes.
awesome, and I think it'll be much appreciative. And
Yeah.
it's great in the time of Uber and finding out where things are located. That's great information, but we do have to say what it's not.
Right.
And that's I think going to be more important because you're going to keep repeating that. Why can't I do X, Y, and Z?
It's one of the reasons why we put it on the slide, because we can always say on April 4th, we presented this to the entire community.
Yeah, you're going to say that again and
Yes.
again. My third point and final one is kind of the law of unintended consequences. So we recently convened a student voice on the board through a subcommittee that's going to meet. And invariably, one of the first things they're going to present is moving the high school start times. And invariably, they're going to come to you and say, how can we move the high school start times? And so this is the law of unintended consequences, where you get back to the next presentation, where now you have a high school student learning on why we cannot, maybe, move the high school start times because we run 3-tier busing. And we outsource, and we don't have our own buses, and there's a driver shortage. So I think and then there'll be pushback to say, but what can you do? And can you do Tuesday? Can you do 7:45 instead of?
We've definitely had these conversations
Right.
since I've started here, and yes, it's something that is very hard to attain if you wanted to maintain your current routing system. You would have to change. You'd have to bring on more providers. It wouldn't just be one more provider. You'd probably have to have an additional staff member on my team to route. Right now, it's tight. So there's a lot more behind the scenes that, like you said, the unintentional. Like, hey, it's great if I can sleep in another hour and not get on the bus at 6:50 in the morning to get to school, and it's great. And there's health all that data is there, right? But what can be supported? Not that I always ask for more stuff to be put on my plate, but I am not fearful of being part of those conversations so that the expectation doesn't go so far down and then all of a sudden it's, well, we can't do it because of busing, right?
I envision that coming back to you, and when I hear of your challenges and limitations, I wonder about your bandwidth to address a lot of those. So hearing the additional staff might be needed. I can appreciate that, and that might just be where you're at, saying, "Look, I understand that," but it is important to hear that voice and to bring it back, and them to have some of the data that they might not be privy to, because from a student high school perspective, they stand on the corner. It takes them there. That's it. It works. I don't
They
need
don't
to
see
know
the network.
behind the curtain stuff. So great.
Yeah, I mean, when we looked at going from a 3-tier to a 2-tier to support different bell times, it was about 100 extra drivers,
Sure.
10 to 12 extra $1 million in expense just to add that. So, and then you lose some efficiencies. You lose some of these initiatives that are spread across multiple contractors. Like MyStop would go away unless all contractors allow us to put it on their vehicles. But it gets a little trickier for sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Rising.
So the MyStop. I can't believe it's actually happening after, what did we sign the contract, 4 or 5 years ago, I believe?
Been a couple days.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. I think you're going to have a lot of parents. Actually, here's a question for you. So will the MyStop be available for preschool? Special-
Anybody who's riding a bus route will have access
So also
to it.
our special ed kids as well? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of parents, those that pre-K through 5 are going to be using the app, but a lot of these 6th through 10th graders will be using the app. And I will partially echo
Remind
a
them
little
of the
bit of what
slide.
Mr. Karubis said, is that this is not to be used to run to the bus when the bus is 30 seconds away. This is only to check when the bus is running late. you know, I hope it's used correctly and not incorrectly.
Turning it off is a flip of the switch, fortunately.
Yeah.
Getting it started is not.
Yeah. And then just touching on the electric buses, and I kind of know this is, you know, I saw this happening. There was initiative, I think by 2026, the whole state of California needs to be electric buses or electric vehicles that are transporting.
Semis, everything, yeah.
That are transporting students. You know, I am in favor of electric buses, but here's what I'm not in favor of, and I'm gonna be brutally honest, is that bus companies, in my opinion, severely overcharge school districts. Now, they are kind to us because we are a larger district, but their prices are very pricey, and as we've known and have seen, the increases of those contracts have gone up significantly in the last 5 years. Now, I understand a lot of that has to do with driver cost, acquisition of drivers, training of drivers, and most recently, gas prices, because remember, the routes are priced by route, not necessarily by gas, right? That's included. So, while moving to electric buses can be good from the standpoint of no more high gas prices, the driver acquisition and driver cost is still going to be there. Maintenance is somewhat eliminated because there's not as many mechanical parts with electric bus, but there's also the power charging stations and all that. So I guess where I'm going with this is that while I am on one hand in favor of electric buses, I'm not in favor of significantly increasing the transportation cost of our district for the sake of electric buses.
Yep.
I care about the environment, so don't let that be misunderstood, but I also care about the finances of the district.
Yep.
So I just wanted to throw that out there, and I look forward to seeing how that pilot goes. That's all I got.
Ms. Jane?
As I was hearing Board Member Karubis ask questions, I feel like when we're talking about transportation today, it's just so reflective of how our district handles our budget, you know, across the board, that we have to be so mindful about everything and really trying to push our efficiency without reducing quality. And which is what I'm really hearing today with your presentation, and I really do appreciate that. With regard to my stop, I just am really excited about this. As a parent, I could see myself just being at ease, you know, working late, maybe not being home necessarily when my middle schooler reaches home, just knowing, because sometimes your middle schooler doesn't respond to your texts. So this is very nice for
figure.
me to just check up and say, hey, okay, I know the bus has reached home. So I really think this is going to be a great addition. So thank you for all your work on that. With regard to the electric school buses, I find this super exciting, and I think, again, it shows our leadership efforts as a district to try to push and test out things that aren't the norm yet. And so I'm really excited to see where we lead in that area. One question I do have is with regard to activity buses. I wasn't really clear, and this is something I wanted to bring up during our redistricting conversations, but say a high schooler is involved with an activity, an after-school activity, but doesn't have transportation to get home. Are there buses available to take them home, and how would they access that?
Yes, so the activity buses that the district owns, you're not allowed to do home stop, or you're not allowed to conduct bus stops with them. They don't have the 8-ways, they don't have the stop arms, so you're not allowed to use those for those purposes. But we do have for student that run late activity routes at both the middle, some elementary for like late homework club, and all the high schools. So yes, they're available for the late runs. Yep.
And how does a student access that? Or
They work with their house their dean, the school office to get added to a bus route.
Okay.
Depending on where the population density lives, sometimes we'll just put a bus stop at like Welch Elementary. They'll get off there, walk through the neighborhood to get home. We won't have them crossing busy roads. We still treat the hazards as hazards and those types of deals. But those routes run longer because you'll have 1 or 2 running the entire attendance boundary for that school, as opposed to like Mattia 42 running, where it's a 10-minute route then. So they are longer. Some high schools have 2. They'll have one at 4:30 and then another one at like 5:15 to kind of stagger depending on when schedules end, activity schedules and athletic schedules end. So yeah, they're there and they're available.
Great. Thank you.
No problem.
So I'm also very happy to see this application come forward. I know that it was a lot of work for integrating in our systems, looking at security, that multi-child issue, like different schools, and also the reliability of the app. So thanks for working through all of that. Do other school districts around here use that app right now?
They do, but they have the same challenges with just data. So there's not a lot of school districts using Tyler Drive. In my opinion, the reason why I recommended us going that path is that the GPS data is the tablet itself. It's not the bus with a hardwired device. So I can be in any vehicle, log in, run the route, and that's the GPS that's communicating out. As opposed to if I swap buses and then in the back end I don't change out that bus for the new bus, the data's garbage. It's going to show a bus being in another state potentially, where the tablet is the GPS data that's getting transmitted out, similar to a cell phone. When you're carrying your cell phone and you're using Google Maps, Uber, the driver's logging into an app, and that's your GPS device, which is why we wanted to be the piloters and get that out there. Not only for the driver aspect, they don't have to have a route sheet in their hand. Startup goes a lot smoother and easier. Dry runs are non-existent. Sub-drivers can just jump in, log in, add the route, go. When we have to collapse routes or run sweeper runs, as Mr. Shipley was saying, they just add the stop to their route. Students aren't waiting for a full route to complete. It just becomes part of the existing route, and instead of being 20 minutes late, it's 5 minutes late. So a lot of advantages outside of that. So school districts, not especially in Illinois, aren't there yet with Tyler Drive and MyStop. If they're using MyStop, it's not as reliable as I wanted it to be, mainly because of the GPS data and how it gets transmitted, especially if you have a vehicle that goes down in the shop. There's some things that you have to do on the back end that not everybody does, especially with resources. Transportation directors are behind the wheel, driving routes. Dispatchers, you may only have one, so just you got to allocate your time, right, when the resources run thin.
Yeah, I know my daughter had something at college, and I thought, boy, that's really nice. And she would run out of her dorm or whatever right when that was coming in. Like, I had to walk to school a mile.
She needs to see
when I
slide
was in
21.
But I have to say, I had instances of interacting with you, like through the winter, like especially that snow day. I was amazed at the accuracy of these bus drivers and tracking like the pickups and stops, because I forget there was one time where someone was complaining. It was one of those snow days, and when I contacted you, it was like that person was picked up at 6:57, which was 5 minutes after their stop time. So it's like amazing to me that you have that level of ability to track. So keep up with that. And I also am thrilled with the electric bus initiative. I don't want to do anything that hurts our budget, so I'm happy that they're working through the EPA program to make sure the pricing on renewing their bus fleet and purchasing electric vehicles is cost effective compared to buying a diesel bus. So I'm very happy with that. So I'm looking forward, and I hope we don't get a whole bombardment of a bunch of emails about this. So
Me
thank you.
neither.
Yeah. So thank you very much for working through this, and everything you do. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, our last item tonight is legislative advocacy and Board of Education update. Does anyone have any items? I did go to the large unit district meeting, and I expect some notes or something to come out pretty soon from IASB about changes that are going on. The large unit discussion was about a couple of things focused on the change that was announced from IASB to move away from the NASB to another newly formed organization. And they told us that they expect about 25 states to join that new organization. So pretty significant. And they had some very positive things to say, so we'll keep watching that. They also talked about, we were concerned because Mr. Razak a few years ago met with IASB. The topic of the meeting was to increase the voice of large districts in IASB and changes that could be made there. And at that time, they did devote a person to large unit districts, Lori Grant. So she's been our rep for several years. And it was recently announced that she would not be our rep anymore and that they were kind of doing away with that large unit district configuration as far as support staff from, so we have Dee back with us. So we wanted to know more about what was going on there, and they assured us that you know, they're having these large unit district meetings every quarter. The head of IASB was there. They're going to invite the president next time to also participate, and that should be a good outlet for our concerns and our issues. So they also talked at the meeting, and I'll put out some more notes on this as they publish what they're doing, but the whole resolution process is going through a complete overhaul. They're looking at defining focused and very limited legislative priorities for IASB instead of hundreds of resolutions and all these belief statements. Belief statements look like they will be converted into core values, and that they're going to go through and look at the resolutions, but new resolutions will require alignment with the core values and with legislative priorities, and it'll be very different from what we've experienced. They also recognized how resolutions were repeatedly presented, so they want to make sure that that doesn't continue. And I thought it all sounded very positive, and so they should be, like I said, writing some notes fairly soon that goes out to the wider audience about what they're doing with all those resolutions and things. So, yes. I was trying to look for that one. Yeah, I don't yeah, I think it starts with a C. I'm not sure. But I'll find it and send it, yeah.
I hope we keep the pressure on IASB about the large districts having a larger voice, because in my opinion, the smaller downstate districts have been driving some of the narratives.
Yeah.
And listen, school board issues are school board issues, right? But you know, the resolution process, as you talked about, was kind of going off the rails a little bit. So yeah, I hope that continues.
Yeah, no, we're not going to let them drop that. And I will say the attendance, and it was an in-person meeting, all of the area large districts where the president was there. So they had an active audience and a very active discussion. So, and I know that Kristen Fitzgerald from 203 is on that committee that's re-looking at all the resolutions and things. So I think we definitely won't let ourselves disappear. Yeah. But I think that was it. So with that, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.